I remember being 5 years old, right? It just arrived. And I remember I had just come home from school. And my old man comes home from washing dishes. He's ready to change and head out the door. And he turns to me and goes, "Hey, Tone, do you realize how lucky your old man is?" And I just sort of shook my head. I had no idea what he meant, you know? He goes, "Look, listen to this." He said, "Since I work two jobs on Fridays, while the other fathers are getting one paycheck, I'm getting two. And while the other dads are out there drinking beer and wasting time on the weekends, I work Saturday and Sunday, so I get paid those days too. So what about that? How lucky is your old man?" So that has always stayed with me, you know, and it's really the power of how you internalize a situation, right?
So welcome back, everybody. I'm Matt Rosenthal, and this is Digging In. If you're new to the show, I dig into what it takes to be a success in business, in life, in health. And I do this show weekly because I want to help you reach your potential. I've had people that have helped me reach my potential, and to me, to be able to pay it forward and to bring guests on that have such a diverse set of experiences that can help you, kind of shortcut things and just open up your thinking. To me, that's what it's all about. And today's guest, it's unbelievable. Our guest today, his name is Tony Hernandez, and I'm humbled and I'm grateful actually to have him with me today, because I personally haven't ever spoken to or met anybody that does or is doing what Tony does, right? So Tony's story is really powerful. His childhood experience, this is in my opinion, and he'll tell you for himself, it seems like it shaped everything he is, everything he does. And, Tony, you took your experience and you did something very, very special with it. Your work impacts, I don't know, you'll probably talk about numbers, but immeasurable numbers of people to this day. I know you came from Cuba to the U.S. as a boy, and you're going to talk about that. Growing up as an immigrant in New Jersey, in a blue collar, hardworking environment, surrounded by people like that, it really, really gave you a perspective. But to me, what you're doing is priceless. And what I think is it matters to the generations to come as much as it matters to the fact that you're honoring generations that have gone. And what you're doing is bringing attention to what immigrants of all walks of life encounter when they arrive in the US. And so I wanted to kick it off by saying all of that. I know that there's a corporate background that you can give us some information on, but like I said, what you're doing is special, it's unique, and it's just something that I think is so amazing. So with that, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. That was a heck of an introduction. I really really appreciate it. Yeah, I've got somewhat of a unique background, and you're absolutely right. It has sort of shaped who I've become, not just personally, but to a certain extent professionally. You mentioned that I came over from Cuba as a boy. I did. My family and I arrived in the fall of 1967. And you hear sometimes immigrants talk about, or the children of immigrants. My parents arrived, or my grandparents arrived, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. That certainly was the case with us. We had left communist Cuba at a time when things were very, very, very difficult on the island. And thanks to the generosity of the American people, the American government, some NGOs. There was a group called Church World Service that provided us with the funding for our airplane tickets. And when we got here, handed us a check for $100 and a beautiful note wishing us well. And that's how we started our new lives. And, my father went from, having worked in obviously totally different field in Cuba, to washing dishes at an Italian restaurant in Hackensack, New Jersey. And the two of us being Jersey guys, I think you can appreciate that, right? Pinto's restaurant in Hackensack, New Jersey. He'd open the spot early in the morning, wash dishes all day, come home, shower, and then he'd head out to clean a factory floor at night. And he did that basically 2 full-time jobs, 7 days a week. I think we were here in the country for about 3 years before he ever had a day off. And when you observe that sort of thing as a kid, and you not only see the example, but you hear certain things, there are things that stay with you. I'll give you an example. I remember being 5 years old, right? It just arrived. And I remember I had just come home from school. And my old man comes home from washing dishes. He's ready to change and head out the door. And he turns to me and goes, "Hey, Tone, do you realize how lucky your old man is?" And I just sort of shook my head. I had no idea what he meant, you know? He goes, "Look, listen to this." He said, "Since I work 2 jobs on Fridays, while the other fathers are getting 1 paycheck, I'm getting 2. And while the other dads are out there drinking beer and wasting time on the weekends, I work Saturday and Sunday, so I get paid those days too. So what about that? How lucky is your old man?" So that has always stayed with me, you know, and it's really the power of how you internalize a situation, right? I mean, to certain people, you know, working 2, you know, not necessarily exciting jobs, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, week in, week out, week in, week out for years is a grind. To someone who can suddenly raise their family without the fear of being persecuted, without the fear of being incarcerated for no reason, oh my God, it's a blessing. So it really comes down to how we sort of internalize these situations that we find ourselves in. And that has served me really well for, you know, sort of keeping reality in check and not letting life overwhelm me, because, you know, we all have our fair share of nonsense to deal with. Yeah.
What an interesting. So he said those things to you, not to teach you, to intentionally teach you a lesson. He said those things to you because he actually felt that way. He was that appreciative.
He said all those things because he meant them. And I also believe it was part of him trying to raise me to sort of think along the same lines, you know, and he would do that repeatedly over and over again. And here's a guy with a 3rd grade education. Okay.
Oh, wow.
My father literally had a 3rd grade education.
Wow.
I remember years later, 1973, he buys a brand new electric 225, right? And we pull it out of this Buick dealership and it starts pouring rain. We're at a traffic light. I'm like, oh man, how horrible is pouring rain on this beautiful brand new car. He stops, he looks at me. He says, "Hey," he says, "you know how many blind people would shave 10 years off their life to be able to just look at the water running down our front windshield? How dare you say it's an ugly day? God forbid, how dare you say it's an ugly day?" So it was that all along, you know, the path. And you know, those are things that mark you. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. You know, that perspective it's everything is a matter of perspective.
Totally.
Right. So it's so beautiful the way you're describing that, because I mean, come on, look at the world we live in. Every generation is more and more jaded, and every kids have more and more, especially with communications at our fingertips. And I don't know, I feel like, you know, I grew up in the 80s. I almost feel like, I guess every generation has the things that they feel are true for them, but I almost feel like what you're saying, which I can relate to, I don't even know that my own kids will be able to relate to it, or the recent generations. Things are just so different.
Well, that's the whole thing, is how do we, right? And that's sort of a challenge for our generation.
Right.
How do we, and that's part of the reason why I started this project, by the way, the Immigrant Archive Project. The reason I wanted to tell these immigrant stories was because these are quintessentially American stories. As much as we like to, as a nation, we like to vilify immigrants and blame immigrants for all kinds of nonsense. There is not a more American story than the stories of those that are absolutely self-made and are American by choice.
Amen.
Right?
That's
you
right.
You can win the lotto and drop out of your mother's uterus in Hoboken. You're an American. But when you're risking everything to become an American, that's a different situation. It's a totally different situation. And I think it needs to be sort of looked at that way and appreciated. And again, that's one reason why I started the project. I wanted to sort of set the record straight. I launched the project in 2008. And at the time, the conversation around immigration had taken a very negative turn. You know, there are people in Arizona blaming immigrants for all kinds of things. And, you know, folks claiming that these border markets, the crime rate in border, you know, when you look at the FBI statistics, the safest places in the country are border markets. You know, you would have been safer living in El Paso, where I was just shooting some film a couple of weeks ago, than in Wayne, New Jersey, or in Union City. It's a safer city. It's a safer city, you know. So the statistics don't back up any of that nonsense. So I wanted to sort of set the record straight. And I also wanted to see if perhaps by staying connected to these stories, we can help at least do a very small part to help break a vicious cycle that's been ongoing in this country and most countries that have had, sort of a strong immigrant contribution. And that is as immigrants arrive, they inevitably are met with resistance, right? As much as the country opens its doors, the way the nation opened its doors to the Cuban diaspora, we were still met with a certain degree of resistance. It's
There's
just
a cultural resistance, you're saying.
cultural resistance. Yeah, you don't speak the language, you
Right.
dress different, all of the things that come with being an outsider. And that, again, that's just human nature. That served us well for thousands of years when we were busy attacking each other, out in the woods somewhere as cavemen. You were a member of my tribe. Anybody else that didn't look or smell or behave like us, we had to be weary because they could kill us. But we've, thankfully, we've moved on. We don't need to be afraid of the strangers much anymore. But inevitably,
so Tony, there's a video. I'm sorry to interrupt you. One of the videos that you sent me that I watched, I can't remember the young lady's name. She was telling stories about what she went through as a child in school and being made fun of. And it was a 1.5-minute video. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Was it where the school teacher made a real difference?
Yes. Yes.
You know what? I've done over 3,000 hours of interviews, and I can tell you that lady's name is Lizzet Landa.
That's right.
And what an amazing story. And what I love about that story is another reason why I created the project, because immigrants would not be, we wouldn't be able to contribute the way we do to this society if the majority of the American society wasn't good to immigrants. Okay. So part of that story is, I think this still, even with all our warts and all our faults, is still really an amazing, remarkable, incredibly humane society. And I owe everything that my family and I have become. I owe the fact that, we live in a free society and we've been able to improve our lot exponentially in just one generation. We owe that to the American people and the nation. And I don't think there's anything that I could ever do or accomplish to begin to repay that debt of gratitude.
And that is the American dream.
That is the American dream.
That's the
American dream. So what I love about Lizzet Landa's story is that, the person that turned her life around, and for those that are listening or watching and are obviously not familiar with what we're talking about, there was a young woman who I interviewed in Texas years back, and her mother had crossed the border without documentation. They were undocumented for some years. And she was one of a handful of Latino kids at her grade school. So they made fun of her, stuff kids do, right? I mean, kids make fun of the weak one in the pack, whether he walks with a limp or she's cross-eyed. They always pick on the worst thing, and they ride it into the ground. And they were particularly brutal with her. But there was a teacher, a school teacher, that took her under her wing and realized how she was being abused, and had lunch with her. Said, don't have lunch with the other kids. Come and have lunch with me. And saw that she was a gifted student, and really turned that kid's life around in a very, very, very meaningful way. So that's one component of countless immigrant stories, right? They arrive, and there's someone that's native to this country that takes them under their wing and looks out for them and gives them advice and nurtures them and helps them sort of realize their full potential. And you can't tell the immigrant story without that component to it.
Do me a favor, because you did bring up a good point. We kind of skipped over what you're actually doing.
Oh, yeah. So as I mentioned, I wanted to, okay, so you want me to explain exactly?
So talk about, so you came here when you were 5.
Right.
You had, you were given $100 to get started. You guys started with nothing. You guys have built the American dream. Your father taught you some invaluable lessons. I mean, you're carrying it forward, but along the way, you became a very successful guy by most standards. And you you're paying it forward, right? By doing something, right? What is it that you're doing?
Okay, so what I'm doing is I created an initiative in 2008 called the Immigrant Archive Project, which has become the leading oral history project on the modern immigrant experience in the US. It was sort of an idea that came to me some years back, literally sitting immigrants and hearing their stories in their own words, not allowing others to, point the finger, immigrants are this, that, and the other thing. No, just tell me your story. Every immigrant has a story. Tell me your story. And we set out to record them literally on audio with a digital handheld recorder. And after recording, I don't know, maybe half a dozen of these, I realized that people were really pouring their souls out to me.
Yeah.
And I said, look, this needs to be done at a different level. So fast forward to today, we've documented well over 3,000 hours of content. We shoot everything in 4K. As a matter of fact, we shoot this on red motion capture technology cameras. We film these stories on the same cameras that Marvel shoots their films in, which is insane.
Oh, no kidding.
Which is insane.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But you know what? They can be enjoyed for many, many years to come in the absolute best quality. But again, this wasn't sort of an idea that popped into my head, and I had no experience in production, right? At the time, I had served as, I ran ESPN in Latin America for years. I was executive vice president of ESPN. I was the vice president of CBS radio networks. I ran one of their radio networks in New York. Excuse me. So, I had experience in television and radio and production. So when this idea came along, I had the 10,000 hours in already. But yeah, it's become literally the single most gratifying work of a relatively long and complicated and very rewarding career. But you get to a point also, at least I did. I'm sure you have. If not, you probably will. Where you ask yourself, okay, so is this it? Has my life been? How do I help? God bless them, but how do I help Colgate sell more toothpaste on ESPN? How do I help AT&T sell more minutes on a radio network? There's got to be
That's
more.
it.
There's got to be more to life. And that, by the way, that's a wonderful thing. I enjoy doing that. I still enjoy doing that. It's very lucrative. It's allowed us to educate our children and live sort of the life we imagined when we arrived in this country. But there had to be something more. And I think I found that more by telling these immigrant narratives. Yeah.
I hear you talking about what really inspires you and what your real purpose is beyond the corporate success. You have found a purpose that is bigger than any one person, right? That's what I'm hearing, which I'm inspired. And that's why when I started this off today, what I said, because I find you and what you're doing very inspirational. And I'm glad that we've connected and that we're able to talk and hopefully, people learn about what you're doing, because I had said to you before we hit the record button, we're all immigrants, right? So my great grandparents came from Russia, Poland, Lithuania, etc. And you had said it in a beautiful way, but that experience is universal. When people come from different countries, doesn't matter what generation. I can only imagine that my great grandparents probably had some difficulties. They settled into New Jersey, Paterson. They all lived in Paterson, right? And Paterson was very segmented. Depending on where you came from, that's who you live with. And it was, has it really changed all that much? Well, you're bringing awareness that I think is beautiful.
Well, thank you. And it's very important, this sort of awareness. And I'll tell you why. And I was alluding to it earlier and I kind of got sidetracked. There's this sort of recurring cycle in American history where you have an immigrant wave, be it Poles, Jews, Italians, Irish, right? They all arrived and they all were met with the nonsense that they were met with. Jews weren't necessarily welcomed with open arms. Irish, there used to be signs in storefronts throughout New York and Boston that read Nina, and Nina stood for no Irish need apply. Okay, so I keep it moving.
I just learned something new.
Oh yeah. You're looking for work, keep it moving. This is not your spot, you know.
Okay.
But then inevitably, they make the point that they integrate into society. You're 1, 2, 3 generations removed, and guess what? People realize, okay, the Irish aren't so bad, right? We had them all wrong. The Jews aren't so bad. We had them all wrong. The Poles aren't so bad. But then that second or third generation, in many cases, become the people their grandparents feared when they first arrived. They become so disconnected from their own family's immigrant story that now they're like, well, wait a second, these Guatemalans today, well, how are they different than the Irish? You know what I mean? They're looking for the same opportunity. You just were able to leapfrog ahead thanks to a lot of work that your family has done. And we're able to provide you with an education and the language skills and the skill sets to move forward. But, you know, these immigrants from countless other nations that are arriving on our shores today, they're coming for the same reason your grandparents came. They're coming for the most part for the same reasons why my parents and I came. You know, they're simply looking at a better shot for a better shot at life. So part of what motivated me to create this project was to hopefully be able to connect these stories with the children and grandchildren of immigrants to remind them of, you know, from where they came, you know, what was that experience? And, you know, again, it's universal. I'm sure my family and I went through many of the same experiences and the same feelings and the same longing for family and friends and culture,
Sure.
music and food that your grandparents went
Sure.
through. And that goes on today, you know. But when you look at it very coldly, when you look at the statistics, immigrants have been very, very good for this country. And not just in the arts, right? You know, you have music and you have, you know, I mean, we were talking about your grandparents. You look at the Great American Songbook, you know, what we refer to today as a Great American Songbook. And those are songs sung by the children of Italian immigrants, written by Jewish immigrants. We call that the Great American Songbook. You know, you can't tell the story of America without immigrants having fingerprints over all of the very best of this country. You know, and when you look at the economy, it's insane. It's insane. You know, 40% of all Fortune 500 businesses were started by immigrants. 40%. 25% of all inventors in the US are immigrants. You know, the percentage of Nobel Prize winning scientists that are immigrants is just totally off the charts.
I have a question or something that I'm curious what your feedback is on this, because everything you're saying it leads up to, in spite of the circumstances and in spite of the challenges that immigrants face, what is it that I think I saw that you've got 2,500 hours worth of interviews, right? So you've talked to I could be wrong about that number, but you've talked to
over 3,000 hours right now. Yeah.
Over 3,000. What drives them to push through the challenge, to push through? They must feel depressed. They must feel like they can't go anymore. They must feel all these human things in spite of the cultural adjustment they're making, but yet they push through and they rise to the top. And in many cases, they become, I say materially, they become more successful than people who have been here for generations.
Right.
So what is it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the selection process, right? I mean, those that are willing to, you know, burn the bridges at the beach and venture out into the world are sort of a unique group within the larger context, right? Not, you know, listen, not everybody is willing to open their own business and hang their shingle, right? The majority of people would rather keep getting a paycheck and have that security. So the majority of people aren't willing to leave their country and risk it all in search for something better. So already you're seeing that the majority of folks that do take that decision aren't as perhaps risk averse, are people that are willing. They understand what's in front of them, right? There's no one, like a friend of mine likes to say, you know, the only people that start at the top are those digging a hole. Nobody comes to this country And, unless you're, that 0.1% that you made it in your own country and you're coming here with a boatload of cash, the majority have to really work their way up. And they know that. And they know that coming in. But it also speaks to how dire of a situation they had in the countries that they're leaving, right? When they're really willing to, wash dishes and clean factory floors 16 hours a day, 7 days a week with a smile on their face in order to have a shot. They still see this, and I think it's less so every day, but they still see this as, this amazing land of opportunity. I think those opportunities are shrinking, unfortunately. When we arrived in '67, there were ample opportunities for someone with a third grade education to find work in a New Jersey factory. Well, the majority of those New Jersey factories aren't around anymore. Those jobs have been sent overseas.
That's right.
So it's I would argue it's even harder in one sense, easier in another than when we arrived. It's easier in that now you have a doctor that speaks your language if you're emigrating from a Spanish-speaking country. We were hard pressed to find a doctor that spoke Spanish in 1967. There's legal services, a radio network, television network, magazines, newspapers. You can get all of that in your language of choice. That would have, our heads would have exploded had we thought of, wow, that's going to be available one day. That was very foreign to us. But more importantly, you can live with all of that. What you can't live without is a job. And when you have a third grade education, you're not qualified to do a lot of things that, require a little bit of an education.
You're right. Things really are changing, and technology is speeding that up exponentially. Exponentially. And you
you remember as a kid, right? Driving up and down, what was it, the Parkway, right? You'd have to pay your 35 cents or whatever it was. And there was somebody there to take your money. There's nobody there at the toll.
You got to aim. You got to throw it into the basket.
Yeah. But before there were the baskets, there were
people.
Money. So, those 15 people across all those aisles
They're all gone.
Are gone. And replicate that over and over and over and over and over again with so many jobs. And you remember, the factories were buzzing in New Jersey and New York and Boston, throughout the Northeast.
No question.
And
I'll tell you, growing up, my best friend's father owned a garment factory in Passaic. You know where Passaic is in Jersey?
Right. Yeah, sure.
And he had 110 employees. All of them were immigrants. And come the mid 90s, that factory was shut down. All of the sewing, all the cutting and sewing went to Mexico. But it's being done there. I don't know what's happening now. This is a long time ago, but he had to shut the factory down. That was in the mid 90s.
Right. Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
A long time ago. My father eventually found work in the textile industry and did actually do very well in the textile industry. And all of those jobs are now in China.
They're gone.
And it's funny, if you see a photo of a textile plant in China, you'll see a sea of machinery. And there's basically, one guy keeping an eye on everything and, a security dog. That's
so what does that mean for the people that are coming here? So you're experiencing it. Real time. You're in communication with people. You're meeting people. They're coming here. 5 years ago, 4, 3, 2, 1. Like, it's very recent. So what are they finding? Are they really still struggling 3, 4 years later, or have they actually? To your point, they're not risk averse, and I would venture to guess that there's a level of creativity.
Tremendous level of creativity. Tremendous level of creativity. Yeah, you have.
Are they figuring it out?
Oh yeah, they always figure it out. And they're willing to sacrifice much more than, let's say, our children's generation, right? They're willing to move into a small apartment, 6, 7 guys into a 1-bedroom apartment and put their money away. And one guy that I interviewed in New York a few years ago came from Mexico and was hired at a pizzeria and became sort of like the old pizza dude's like right-hand guy. And 6 years later, the guy said, "Look, I want to sell it. Why don't you buy it from me? I'll give you terms. and you buy it from me. And he wound up buying the Old Dude's Pizzeria. And he said, the proudest moment in my life was on September 11, when those towers came down. And for the next week, I just offered free pizza and soda to every single soul that walked out in front of my store. And it was devastating. It was the first time I realized I'm American now. And it was a very small way of thanking this country for giving me the opportunities that it's given me. So yeah, they for the most part, they figure it out. Although over the last 4 years, there've been a lot of sort of return migration, right? A lot of immigrants that have gone back.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. And not only back to their home countries, I know of quite a few people that I've interviewed over the years that have decided to go north and are now in Canada.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. During the previous administration, I think they found somewhat of a, draconian pursuit of them. And, immigrants sort of stay, that's why you have a Chinatown and a little Italy, right? They kind of like stay in contact with people, and you go where they are. So as soon as, you have several of them find work in Canada and wind up getting their papers in Canada, others follow. And I know quite a few that have ventured north. Yeah.
So tell me, so you've got 3,000 hours. So how is it that, do you seek people out? Do they just, does the word spread in the community that you're there and that you're the ultimate storyteller? I mean, you're gathering their stories and they want to tell their stories?
Yeah, it started out that way, right? Like, telling friends and family to come on camera and let's have a conversation. And we've been featured on Univision and NBC News and Forbes and so forth. So we're at a point now where we don't have enough hours in the day to film the stories that come to us. So we try to be as intelligent as possible. We still do this the old-fashioned way. We still sit with someone on camera, on two cameras, so we can cut back and forth, and it's professionally lit. It looks a certain way, and I want to keep those production values. So there are certain stories that I'm interested in depending on what's going on, and I'll go out and secure those. And then we've also been helping corporate America sort of humanize their brands through storytelling. We have we're wrapping up year 3 of a really interesting partnership with McDonald's, where, and I don't mean to insert a commercial here, but it really is an interesting thing.
No, this is very interesting.
Yeah, they saw our work and they're like, hey, would you be willing to tell the stories of Latino owner operators who are either immigrants or the children of immigrants? And those stories have just been phenomenal. People who, again, sort of like my family and I arrived here with nothing, and today, they've been able to do a lot for their communities. In some cases, a guy that owns 28, 30 McDonald's, they've helped, build the local Ronald McDonald House. They've done a lot of good things for the community, and it's been a real pleasure to work on. Yeah,
it's really the ultimate in inspiration and gratitude and appreciation. And I mean, to your point a little while ago, people you're mentioning, it is when you reach a certain point that far exceeds where maybe you expected to go or anybody else had gone previously. What is it about? Like, what is your point? What is your purpose of being here? The purpose of being here is far greater than making money.
Right. Right.
Money is important. Money, we have fun. We live a more comfortable life, but it's not fulfilling.
But there's something more to just living a comfortable life. A comfortable life can be numbing. It really can.
Right.
There's tremendous satisfaction out of working, out of hard physical work, right? Tremendously satisfying. It's just, it's in us. It's part of our DNA. Sitting in front of a computer screen in an air-conditioned office day in and day out, and being able to, afford a slightly better vacation or a new car.
Yeah. Wow.
It's soul sucking. I'll be honest with you.
It really is.
I'll give you an idea. I always loved cars as a kid. Always loved cars. In 2000, I went out and I bought a very unique Ferrari. As a matter of fact, Ferrari stopped making this vehicle. So I found the exact color combination that I wanted. It was in Seattle. So I flew to Seattle, and it turned out to be Paul Allen's car, if you're familiar with Paul Allen.
Apple?
If the Microsoft
Microsoft, I said Apple.
The Seattle Seahawks, yeah. So
Yeah.
I bought Paul Allen's car. It was a 456 MGTA
Wow.
I think it may have been 2001. So I flew up, I test drove it. I said, I love it. I wrote him a check. I sent a truck to pick it up, and it was delivered to Miami about a week later. Now, what is it, 20 years later? I think I may have put 13,000 miles on a car. It's meaningless. It's
After you got it, like it's meaningless, but at the time it meant something.
I was
Got
scratching.
it.
I was scratching an 8-year-old boy's itch, and then the moment I got behind the wheel and I drove to a restaurant and I parked it outside, and people look at the car, and you come out with your wife and you find 3 tourists standing in front of the car taking a photo, I realized I don't want that. I don't want that, and it's not because I'm any more humble or any more. I just don't want that. That's not me. That's not. But you know what? I enjoyed looking at the car. It's gorgeous. I'll wash it by hand every now and then. I'll put it back in the garage. I can't tell you the last time I took it out for a ride.
Isn't it interesting? I have a similar story, not a Ferrari story, but I really can relate to what you're saying. It's, I mean, I was born here, but I grew up with very little, even though, you know where I lived, but I was a poor kid in town.
Yeah.
And so as I began to work hard and everything, to your other point, everything I ever did was manual labor until I was in my late 20s. It was all manual labor. And it does form you in a certain way when you are responsible for the hard work that gets you the things that you want in life materially.
Right.
Fast forward, many years later, I don't know why I decided I wanted a Porsche. I never driven one. I was the 10-year-old kid living, in the apartment complex, who I lived in an apartment and shared a room with my brother until I was 18 years old. I had 2 dresser drawers. Anyway, I know there's something that it does to you. So I'm like, you know what? I'm doing well. Let me get a Porsche.
Right.
I stretched myself a little bit. It was an old one. I bought an 06,
Okay.
911.
Uh-huh.
The thing got delivered from, I think it was Orlando, wherever it was. They met me on Route 23 at the Target, this big car carrier. They rolled the car off the truck. I get in the car. I was shaking. I didn't even want to drive the car. I was like, I drove it around a little bit. And I will tell you that it felt good for a while because the ego was getting stroked. But it did not take long before I stopped driving that car. It sat in the garage. I maybe put 5,000 miles on it in the 4 years I had it. And then I sold it. And I learned a big lesson in life. And that was probably in my late 30s when that happened. I was like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just a car.
Yeah, it's just a car.
It doesn't matter. Like, it didn't make, I still had the same, I'm still the same guy inside. I still had the same fears, anxieties, happiness, sadness. It didn't make a difference. Right. And now I got a car sitting in the garage. Like, when I really peeled back the layers, I realized that for me, it was a thing where I just did it because I could, but then I realized it had no real meaning to me. So you just made me think of that. It just reminded me.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful sort of epiphany, when you realize that, you realize what's important in life, and you realize what's not, and what's, sort of this cultural conditioning that we have. And listen, there's nothing wrong with, enjoying good things in life and having a nice home and, everything that comes with it. But again, to your earlier point, there is something more that will be much more satisfying and gratifying. And to a certain extent, I found it here. And you touched upon something earlier, which is, being involved with something that's bigger than you, This is something that I hope to hand the reins to someone else eventually and have them continue telling these stories, because the stories will change over time, right? There'll be different moments in American history, and it'll be important to carry on. Um, but this isn't me. I'm just a vessel to tell these stories. I get a lot of I get a lot of kudos from people on this work, but I'm just putting a microphone in front of people. They're the ones living that amazing, crazy story. And if you've seen the videos, you see that you never hear my voice, you never see my face. I'm sort of like the unknown comic of interviewers, right? I've got a bag over my head. I'm off in a corner somewhere. You don't even hear me, unlike the unknown comic. But it's all about them, and it's cool. It's very cool.
You're a facilitator. It's what's the word? Posterity. It's going to be there for all of time.
Yeah, yeah. Which opens the door to some really wonderful sort of questions in cathartic conversations. These interviews are unlike the way we normally converse. I sort of, make it a point to take people a little bit deeper. And if there's something that I've heard over and over and over again after an interview, particularly with older people, they'll be like, "Hey, can I get a copy of the full interview?" And of course, I'm like, "Yeah, we'll give you a full copy of the whole interview." You may see a minute and a half, but there's an hour that person spent on camera with me.
Of course, yeah.
And inevitably, I'll ask, why do you want the entire interview? And the most common answer is, because I spoke to you about things that I never mentioned to my wife or my kids. Yeah. And that's pretty heavy.
That's really powerful.
But when you have someone on camera and you explain to them that, this will live on. So knowing what you know now, right? After living the life that you've lived, if you could offer a piece of advice to your grandkids, what would you say? It's heavy.
Before you say anything else, because I want the answer, I only wrote down 3 questions for this conversation.
As you should have. Yeah, the best conversations are like this. Yeah.
Because I don't like the scripted conversations. I like it to be natural. But I will tell you, there is a question here, and you just actually fed right into it, which is, what's the most common theme that you hear in story after story? But what I really want to hear is, what's the most common answer that you get to that question? Because that's really what I was really asking.
First of all, the most common theme I'd say is gratitude. That's the most common.
Amen.
That's the thread that runs through all of this, is just an enormous amount of gratitude. The importance of family is there, if not 100%, certainly 99.999%, the importance of family. Everything else is scenery along the way. It's the importance of family.
So the common answer to your question that you posed to them, their answer was family.
99% of the time when I ask them, this is one question that I do ask everybody, because the other question I tend to ask old people. You wouldn't ask a 25-year-old to give advice to the look at you like you're drunk. But I ask them, what are they the proudest of?
Wow, brilliant question.
Yeah, and almost to a person, their family. I'm proudest of my family. I'm proudest of what my kids have accomplished. I'm proudest of how my parents have sacrificed so that I could, be a college professor today. Or they sacrificed that I could be the first in the family to graduate from college. I'm proudest of my family.
And that brings together what you and I were talking about with the nonsense with cars, us getting cars.
Right.
Because what I'm curious what you discovered, but what I will volunteer what I discovered when I went through this phase of my life of buying cars and buying watches and buying shit that just doesn't matter.
Right.
As I got older, I'm almost 50 now. What I've really come to, who I am now, is it's love, joy, happiness, gratitude, being humble, being appreciative, paying it forward, all of that. But on top of all of that is family. And it's funny how, as jaded and complacent as our society is getting with the generations that are getting things handed to them, it's the immigrants that are coming in that are keeping alive the spirit of gratitude, appreciation, hard work. It's interesting how that keeps cycling.
Absolutely. 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 And, sort of those, those American traits that we value, right? Those that can lift themselves up by the bootstraps and are, wonderful head of household and providing the right, examples for the kids. For the most part, that's coming out of immigrant communities. It really is. It really is.
It really is a shame that we all these over generations that we all, I mean, so it was take 3 or 4 generations. I'm the 4th generation in this country. I can tell you by my parents, well, I can't go by my family, but the families I observe, people my age, most of their parents did well, middle class, maybe upper middle class, whatever it was. It certainly was better than the generation before, which would be my grandparents' age. And I've noticed that it sort of has leveled off, at least there's only so far you can go, unless you're, the 1%, which is different. That's not everybody.
Right.
So it does take some sort of constant rebirth.
It does.
Otherwise, the whole country is jaded.
It really does. It really does. It really does. But look,
It's really intriguing.
Where are we seeing the majority of graduates today in STEM fields? I see very few kids in my neighborhood going into STEM, very few. I see an overwhelming number of immigrants chasing STEM because they know that it's a hard road, right? It's a very hard road, but it pays off extremely well.
Sure.
Sure. I don't know the last time you spent time in a hospital, but the number of foreign doctors and nurses and specialists in the healthcare industry, it's overwhelmingly immigrant.
I've noticed it.
Yeah.
Between my injuries from sports and my gallbladder attacks every so often.
Yeah. That's the norm. That's the norm.
Something funny, totally off topic. We moved here, I told you 2 years ago. My wife started playing tennis. In Jersey, we didn't play tennis.
Right. My wife took up tennis when we moved here from Jersey too.
Like a Florida thing.
Right.
So I have been playing golf for like 20 years. I've never played well. I was like attacking it because I just wanted to beat myself. I'm like, I can be good at this, but I never was. I'm 5'6". I swing like a schmuck. So about 2 months ago, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start playing tennis. So I took a few lessons. I'm naturally athletic because I've never stopped being athletic.
Right.
And I went out 2 days ago, not 2 days ago, but 3 or 4 days ago. And I had it's a guy that I met in my development. And so we got these 2 big bins of balls. And so he's hitting the balls at me, trying to give me practice. And I stepped on a ball. And I stepped out the wrong way. I twisted my ankle. I felt fine. I kept going for like another hour. I get home and I'm sitting here at my desk and working. And I had to go pick up a friend from Jersey that was flying in. And I go to get up and I can't put any weight on my foot. I guess it took a little while to settle in.
Right.
By the time I got to the airport, I had to have this woman drive the car home. I couldn't move. I had to have my in-laws bring me over crutches. I mean, it was just ironic. So my wife and her friend who had picked up it from Jersey, they were like, you got to go to the hospital. That's what made me think of it. Right. I'm like, I stepped on a tennis ball. I'll be fine. Yeah. I'm not going to the hospital. Give me some ice. Give me some Advil. I'll be good in a couple of days. And lo and behold, I'm on a treadmill running 7 o'clock this morning. It was 3 days.
Oh, wow. Wow, you're right. You're right.
In this particular case,
that's when you know you're hitting 50, right? When you get hurt playing tennis.
I got news for you. I can feel the difference. I can feel the difference from a couple of years. That's a whole other story, but I can feel the difference.
Yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. Yeah.
I gained 5 pounds out of nowhere about a year ago, and I'm like, I can't get rid of it. What's that all about? Anyway, your story is so inspirational, and we haven't even really scratched on the surface of the stories you can probably tell. Tell me something really quick, as we're going to wind down in a minute, but we skipped over how you went from 5-year-old, come to the US, you had a really good culture in your home. Your father really taught you good lessons. You skipped over how you wound up working at ESPN. You skipped over like, I don't know, 20, 30 years.
I did. I skipped over it for years, although I was very young when I got to ESPN. I was young. Yeah.
Tell me what the secrets are. Tell me what are the things that you took from your childhood that helped you just go past other people?
I think what enabled me to sort of take off was the fact that I did the only thing I could do, which was to play to my strength. I wound up in college. I didn't know how to apply to college. I didn't know anybody that had been to college. Luckily, I played football, and school gave me a shot to play. And when I was up there, I had a friend of mine who was in the communications field. And I thought I wanted to be a business major, and I hated business. I hated my teachers. I hated the people that were taking business courses with me. I thought it was horrible. I enjoyed the football program, but everything else I hated. And
Right.
He implored me one time, hey, why don't you come in and maybe take a radio course? Because he was a DJ at a nightclub that I used to bounce at, believe it or not. And I see, DJ gets all the girls. So I'm like, I got to learn how to do this, So I took a course, and I walked into this building, and there were actors rehearsing lines, and people producing a television show. And I walked into the radio studio, and for some reason, it really resonated with me. It spoke to me. I felt at home, even though it was, I'd never been in a situation like that before. And I loved it. And I loved it. So I switched majors. I majored in communications, graduated in '84, came back home, went to get some advice from someone who I knew. He said, hey, I've got a friend of mine who just bought a Spanish language station in New York. Maybe you should talk to them. And yeah, I wound up getting a job in sales. I'd never sold a pair of flip-flops in my life. 6 months later, I started doing fairly well. I'm giving you sort of the long story, but it's the only way to tell it. 6 months later, the head of sales, the VP of sales, tells us in a meeting that he's resigning, he's leaving, he's going to open up an ad agency in Miami, of all places. We were in New York City at the time. And as he's saying, I'm resigning, I'm leaving, what's the movie that's playing in the back of my head is, you need to get the 4 station owners together and explain to them why they should give me that job. And I think I was maybe 22 years old. So I was friendlier with one out of all the 4. So I went into his office. I said, man, any chance you can get your partners together? I just 5 minutes of your time is all I ask. Wow, what's going on? I said, I'll tell you once everybody's together. Just 5 minutes. I promise it won't be a waste of time. So, all right. A few minutes later, hey, Tony, come on in. There are these 4 dudes that own the radio station. And I said, gents, I hear so-and-so is resigning. I'm here to tell you why I should be the guy to replace him. And let me tell you why. I'm college educated. I'm fully bilingual. I'm a workhorse. I don't have a wife and kids. I can travel the country and go pitch a radio station everywhere. I'm willing to come in Saturday and Sundays. As a matter of fact, let's do this. Pay me half, because I knew he was making a boatload. I said, pay me half of what you were paying him. And if in 6 months I don't work out, fire me. If I light a torch to this place, then you can pay me, a reasonable salary for my work. And I said, okay, well, you know what? Let us discuss it. Next day, we'll give you an answer. And the next day, they said, all right, grab your stuff and move it into the corner office. So at 22, I became VP of sales of a New York City radio station. And I was able to, fly to Anheuser-Busch and present to the Bush client, and travel to Cincinnati and present to P&G. And that really sort of, my career really sort of took off from there. And then, ESPN heard about me, and one thing led to another.
Hang on, just skipping over something important here that first of all, the certainty and the confidence that you have or had to walk in and to calmly.
But it was easy. It was easy. It was easy.
But not everybody can do that. That is.
But not everybody had shoveled as much shit as I had leading up to that point. So you know what I mean? Okay, so here's an interesting anecdote. You remember El Duque, right? Hernandez, a pitcher for the New York Yankees.
Of course, yeah.
All right, so
of course.
So in a previous life, I operated my own Spanish language radio network, and we owned the rights to all of the major sports. So we owned the rights to the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, Major League Soccer, World Cup, everything on Spanish language radio nationally here in the US. So El Duque's rookie year, and he's just killing it, right? I mean, he was like, MVP of that World Series. He was just like a monster. So I'm flying with him one time. I think we were flying either from Miami, New York to Miami, Miami to New York. He was doing some work for us. We were sitting next to each other on a plane. I said, man, what really blew me out of the water is how calm you were. You go from being like a dude risking his life on a raft to all of a sudden you're in pinstripes and you're pitching in the World Series. And it's like, it's like a Tuesday, right? I'm in my bathrobe at home. It's like, no big deal. You were so calm. And he looked at me and he kind of cocked his head like the old RCA Victor dog on the old logo. Like,
yeah.
He's like, man, after you're lost at sea, surrounded by sharks in the middle of the night, pitching in a World Series game is like low-hanging fruit, man. That's not going to throw you off your game. Remember, I was lost at sea on a raft. So, compared to what I'd see my old man do, what? Take a shot at being the VP of sales. It was certainly easier than washing dishes 8 hours a day and cleaning a factory floor 8 hours a day for 3 fucking years before you take a day off. Like, what's the worst that could happen? They fire me for being a schmo and not doing a good job? I don't think it required a tremendous amount of courage. I just saw it as an opportunity, and you have to chase opportunities.
And you didn't have the fear of rejection, and because everything you just said, that's the point. The point is, what's there to be afraid of when you go through what you went through?
Right.
The level, that threshold for what fear means, it's like way, if it even exists.
Of course. And and part of it is also ignorance, right? Part of it is
ignorance is bliss, right?
Ignorance is bliss. I was in a chat the other day with Lucille Ball's daughter, Lucy. And she was asked, her father was immensely successful. He's the guy that created the 3-camera shoot. Most television shows are still shot the way he sort of envisioned, right? This 3-camera shoot. He was a guy that made syndication possible, right? He decided to film these shows. Back then the studios were like, who's going to want to see this episode again? Say, don't worry about it. I'll pay for the film, but I'll own the rights. Brilliant. Right. A $1 billion move. So the guy was brilliant. And she was asked, so why was your father, where did your father have sort of this, innate ability? She goes, I don't think he had any sort of special ability. I think it was a combination of ignorance and fearlessness. Like, who cares if they laugh at my bad idea? Like, compared to what I've been through, laughed at, I was dying. I could have starved to death. What, some guy in a suit laughs at my bad idea? Big deal. So it was and I'm just reminded of it when you brought up this last point. Yeah. I think it's a combination of those things.
That's really interesting. I didn't come to this country from another country, but I think we probably, if we had a much longer conversation for a couple hours over a couple of drinks, probably would relate to some of the similar childhood difficulties that are common amongst anybody when you have no money.
Right.
But there is a survival mechanism that I have found that is just always there. And it is the ability to recognize opportunities that other people don't see. Like, my antennas are always up. And I have people that say to me, they still can't figure out how the hell I got where I got in life. I mean, people that when I was growing up, they were the rich kids or they were the smart ones. I did terrible in school. I failed out of college. I went back and finished and I got my MBA, but I still failed out. I took the most off the wall path, way behind everybody else. My friends were all making money. I was still driving a forklift on the loading docks in Newark, which is true. But my antennas were always up, and I still, to this day, see opportunities that people around me just don't see. And they look at me and they're like, wow, you're lucky. And I'm like, no, I'm not lucky. I'm prepared. I'm ready. I'm willing. I'm able. And I'm not afraid to take risks. And I'm hearing you say that in those words, but I'm hearing the same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. Yeah.
It's a gift to have hardship as a child in different ways.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah.
You don't want to, you don't want to suffer hardships for the first time as an adult. You know, you want to have that grit sort of built in and that fearlessness built in and not face it for the first time. That's why sometimes I think, you know, and I'm a father of 3 daughters. Sometimes we do so much to shelter our kids and not have them scrape their knees.
Yeah.
You know, and you wonder, you know, did we baby them too much? Did we? And thankfully, in the case of my girls, they're absolute ass kickers, all 3 of them. They're 80% piss and vinegar, which is good if you're a woman today. But you know, you do wonder. You know, you do wonder. You know.
Well, tell me something. What is their perspective on um, the heritage, on looking back and seeing what you're doing? They were born here, right? So
Down here, yeah.
what's their perspective, right? You're in the same family. You came here, they were born here. They see what you're doing, but yet they have to have been a little more jaded. I mean, my daughters are different than they're jaded a little bit, right? So
Right. Well, you know, their reality has been completely different from mine. Just, you know, light years away from from what my reality was. And obviously, you know, I worked very hard to make sure that their reality was different. And with all due respect, mine was far better than what my parents. Certainly, my father, my mother was well off in Cuba, but not my dad.
okay.
But I think they identify as Cuban American. You know, they, despite having been born here, and my wife is, you know, Irish American. So it's not like she's getting Spanish; they're getting Spanish from my wife. But the older 2, the younger one, not as much. The older 2 are totally fluent in Spanish. They can, as a matter of fact, my oldest daughter works at Oracle, but my middle daughter works at a PR agency that specializes in Spanish language public relations for Pepsi and McDonald's and a series of major brands. So she's conducting business on a daily basis in two different languages.
That's fantastic. You really need to be able to speak Spanish, and it's so important. It really is.
It really is so important. It really is so important, and it will continue to be more and more important as we move on. You know, as you know, you can't get in the way of these social trends, right? You can't have, you know, sort of white, you know, Anglo families having less babies for decades and Latino families having more babies, and immigration, it just leads to a larger percentage of Latinos in the country. And so it's quickly becoming a more and more important language. Yeah.
I have to ask you one more question, which I didn't. It just kind of popped into my head as you were talking, and I'm not interested in a political answer or conversation at all. I am curious though, the stories that you potentially could hear now from people that are now coming into the U.S., you know, on the southern border. I mean, there's so many people coming over, and there's all different types of people coming, you know, and I guess my question is, are you going to seek out some of those people so you can hear their stories? Because they're probably different than the stories you've already gotten.
You know, that's a really great question. But here's the thing. It's almost like getting immigrant stories is almost like interviewing war veterans. You know, you can't interview a war veteran the day they arrive back from wherever their tour of duty was. You need time. You need to gain perspective. You need to go through some life experiences here, and then that's what you share with me. So to interview someone that has just arrived, they really don't have a story to tell yet.
I look forward to hearing those when that time comes. Those stories are going to be, I think, pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think those stories will be. What I found particularly interesting is that however many years we've been at this now, I guess 13 years. In the last 4 years was the first time that I ever received phone calls, and not many, maybe half a dozen, people asking me to take down their interviews.
You're kidding.
No.
Ooh, I suspect why, but do
Yeah.
you know why?
Yeah. They shared stories of being undocumented, and they were fearful that they would use those narratives to try and deport them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
You
is
said
sad, because that's just a part of our history. That's just a part of our
it
history.
is. It's
Yeah.
it's funny because after I learn more about you and what you're doing, even that in this conversation alone has I have even that much more of a different perspective on all the people that are coming into the country right now. Because I don't watch the news. I can't stand watching it at all. I don't care what channel. I just don't like the negativity.
Yeah. Well, it's negative. Yeah.
But depending on what news outlet you watch, you hear different versions of what's happening now. But at the end of the day, the stories are going to be interesting. You're right. Time will tell.
Yeah.
And I guess time will tell which aspect of it is good for the U.S. and which aspect isn't.
Well, listen, there's a certain human element here. You can't disconnect the experience from that human element, right? So you do have your your knuckleheads that come here and aren't good for the country and commit crimes. I mean, that happens whether you're born here or you're born somewhere else. But what statistics do show is that overwhelmingly, far less likely to commit crime, far less likely to cause trouble. If you're willing to seek out your next meal by putting a gun to someone's stomach, you don't need to leave Guatemala or Cuba.
You would do that wherever you are. That's
Poland.
just who you are.
You do that where you are.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, there are bad apples everywhere, and that happens. But if you do look at FBI statistics, it's particularly small. Yeah.
It makes sense, because if you look at if you take any group of people, I guess look at the subset of 1,000 people, how many of those, or 10,000, how many of them are really inclined to do things that are criminal? It's a very small percentage, because by nature, most people are good.
Right.
And most people, so now you come into this country and you're looking for opportunity, you're not looking to go out of your way to all of a sudden be a criminal, right? So you're right. Anybody who was inclined to do that, they're going to do it wherever they are. And maybe there's a very, very small subset. And by the way, it doesn't matter where you're coming in from. This was true from, did you see that movie? Oh, shoot, what the heck was that movie? The Gangs of New York. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
So the whole movie was about criminals. They all come off the boat and they're all criminals, but that's a small subset. Most of the people weren't.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I've had I could talk to you for hours, actually. they may get upset as Carol's team has to edit this down.
Oh, they do the editing? Oh, fantastic.
No, I have a company. Well, this part we will edit out. I have a company in Chicago that does the editing, but Carol's team, what they do is, we talked about so many things. There's a lot of highlights. They'll pick probably 10 little 30-second, 60-second micro clips, and they'll title them and they'll timestamp them. And then my company in Chicago will break the clips down, put the intros, the outros, the music, and everything. But there's a girl that works for Carol. Her name is Louise.
Yeah, it's a sweetheart.
She has to sit through my videos and she has to watch them, and she has to do all that work. Sorry, Louise.
Pick the best of. There you go. Here's something you might want to consider. September 15th through October 15th is Hispanic Heritage Month. So not sure if you might want to, I don't know how many episodes you've got in the can that you're looking to drop. But this type of conversation, I think, would do particularly well, sort of, amplified under a Hispanic Heritage Month sort of lens.
That's exactly, it's funny because that's exactly when, what's today? Today's the 7th. This won't be ready for 3 or 4 weeks. So that's actually perfect. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, you may draw some more eyeballs to it, some more ears to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So there's one thing that you said probably an hour ago. You said burn the bridges. I made a mental note, burn the boats, which is a Tony Robbins reference. Burn the boats, it does matter. When you have that mindset, and it really struck me when you said it because it's a common theme. It could be immigrants, but it could be anybody. It could be growing up poor. It could be any adversity you have. When you do enter it with the mindset of like, there is no plan B. I'm going in. I'm going to make this work, and I'm going to go. I'm going to go to all ends of the earth to make this work. That is a burn the boats, burn the bridge mindset. There's no turning back, and I'm glad that you said that before. And I think that's a good place for us to sum it up, right? That mindset is fantastic.
Absolutely. And it applies to so much today, right? So many people looking for midlife career changes, you know, and all too often there's a fear of the unknown. You know, the only way you're going to be successful in a midlife career change is if you burn the boats, you go all in, you know, and you just dedicate yourself wholeheartedly with blinders on to that one goal, and don't sort of, you know, for lack of a better term, half-ass it. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Mhm.
And in that book, it's a classic book, but he talks about identify your goal or your primary aim and have a burning desire. And that's what it is. You know, you can't focus on 10 things and be successful at all of them, but if you've got that one thing and you're going for it, it really is true. You go for it, you give it everything you got. And if you mentioned the 10,000 hours, that Malcolm Gladwell book, right? Blink. I think it was Outliers. It was Outliers.
That was Outliers, yeah.
That is true. And you put that time in, you put that 10,000 hours in, you will rise to high levels in whatever field you've chosen and whatever endeavor you've chosen. And don't listen to naysayers. Really.
Absolutely.
Don't listen to naysayers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I like to tell people, you know, you're producing your own movie, man. Cast yourself in the lead role, be the hero, you know. Don't be afraid to go for an exciting life and do something you love, and go full throttle. You know what I mean? Don't pull yourself back. Jump in with both feet. Yeah.
Tony, thank you. I had an awesome time talking to you.
Thanks, my man. I did too.
Pretty cool.
Always good when you connect two Jersey guys, you know?
Yeah, and even the way two Jersey guys, like people are gonna listen to us like, oh, look at these two.
Well, we got something to say. You
know, there's a way that I like to end every episode, and it's so perfect that you're on here today, because I know that you feel the same way. And it's this: work hard, be humble, and hustle. That's what it comes down to.
That's it.
I'm grateful that you were here today, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. It was an honor. I appreciate it.